October of 2007. It was about a month after my father passed away, and I was in a crazy, rough place at the time, and I was looking up dark orchestral music on YouTube and came across a band called Nox Arcana, and I started listening to some of their songs. The first one I remember totally was The Awakening, and I had this crazy vision of a car, my buddy Dave's in particular, which the car ends up in the film, the final product, a 1988 Toyota Land Cruiser, driving into the winter mountains, and the vision just came to me, and it was like they encounter this vampire up in the wilderness, and then it becomes this big fight for survival, and that was the first original initial thought. I knew this vampire would be up there and he would hunt down everyone until there was one left, and originally it had almost more of a Predator vibe, like where it was the guy against the vampire in a final fight for survival, but it's definitely evolved way more than that. So a year later, I started talking to a few people. I was going to college at the time, so we're in October of 2008. My buddy Ryan Pfeiffer, who ended up writing a lot of the story with me, and then my buddy Nick Milo Dragovich, I was playing football at the time, he was coaching, and I started talking to him about it. I knew in the original concept I wanted to play the vampire. That was all I knew, and at the time I knew he was going to have an army of vampires, and that this last guy that he ends up fighting was going to possibly be a recruit of some point. When I started talking to Ryan about it, he's an actor, a friend of mine, and he had said that he had wanted to also play a vampire in the film. And so I thought, well, what if there was two vampires? And then that really ended up expanding everything, because then I knew Elric, the character that I play, would end up being more the tragic hero than the villain, and the character that Ryan plays, Giscard, would end up being more the villain. So that allowed for me to really start exploring Elric's character, and it got me thinking more about the vampire backstory and more, why is he up here in the wilderness, what's going on. I was thinking the classic, like, well, what if he loved a human woman? And then that really escalated the entire evolution of the story. And I was always into Dracula. I was really into that story. And when I was in second grade, I dressed up as Dracula for Halloween. So I was always into that kind of Halloween stuff a little bit. That's the dark side of me a little bit. But so I really wanted to explore that in this. But more than even vampire films that inspired this, I think it became more Shakespeare that inspired this. It became a really Shakespearean tragedy that found a lot of inspiration off of like Hamlet and vengeance stories. And the Shakespearean element of it is what I find fascinating about Shakespeare, is he's very good at really diving into every single layer of thought and psychology and finding the shades of gray, which I was always a huge fan of in any story. Is like there's no total good or bad guy, and you know, it makes things complicated, it makes things unformulaic at times, but I find it more interesting, like everybody's got good and bad in them, and it's just like, I think the good guys in this story, I would say Elric is ultimately a good guy if you were to place him, but the reason he is because he's just trying to do the right thing constantly, but he messes up all the time. Crimson Winter is a story 5 years in the process. I mean, it came with the original idea when I was 20 that we steeped on for a year. Then Ryan and I started writing the original script when we dived deeper into the love story, the backstory, and then another year to make that movie. Well, the 45-minute version was definitely, in some ways, easier because it was easy to see where things needed to be simplified. And the story hadn't quite evolved to the epicness that it did by Crimson Winter. It was still deep and we still had backstories, but the 45-minute version was, all right, specific, and we knew what we were telling. We submitted the film into the Charlie's Film Festival, which is our little college film festival, and it won 10 awards, you know, broke the record, and I think to this day has that record, and won the Best Picture, and, you know, Best Director, all the actors won big awards for it, Best Music, which I used the Nox Arcana music for it, and I remember thinking, like, man, people are into this film. And the original thought was just to go back and refilm some of the scenes and expand upon what was already there, keep it really low budge. I remember the first idea was Nathan Mills, who played Oberon in the film, helped write the later draft. I was showing him the cut of the original one. He's like, man, Brian, like, this is all there. You just need a budget. He's like, if you just had a budget. I remember thinking, like, oh yeah, you know. And then I was talking to Bill Otto about it, and he's like, and I think that was my big decision in May of 2010. I was sitting talking to him about it, and he was like, you know, it'd be cool, like, to see the whole thing get refilmed. And it was an idea, you know, that we were talking about. I was like, I don't know, I mean, it'd be cool to maybe refilm the whole thing with a budget, but there's scenes in there I like how they are, and I talked to him for a while, and then all of a sudden that decision just got made. It was just like one of those things, like, you know what, like, if we're gonna go big, we're gonna go big. Let's just try to do the whole thing again with a budget. And so June of 2010, that was the plan, and that was what we set out to do. The biggest scene that I almost shot for shot the same and edited it very similar was the big climactic scene. I mean, I felt from the original film that was our golden piece, was the climax and the ending. And I didn't really want to touch and make those too much different.
He's taken everything from me! My title, my honor, and my love. I will not rest till I have taken everything from him.
Elric, I don't care about your armies or your war. I care about her. Burn this world down, but leave her.
For 2 years, that was in my head, was how was I gonna match the original climax, because I was so proud of it in that original film that I'm gonna have to recreate it, and it messed with me constantly. Like, when I was shooting that climax, editing that climax, helping the composer with the music for that climax, like, it was just so tough. I mean, it was so tough because I had something to compare it to, and you know, I'd have big deep talks with my brother who's a musician, and be like, man, how do you recreate that lightning captured in a bottle? You know, can you do it? You know, and I don't know. I mean, there's still things about the original climax I like better than the new one.
He's taken everything from me! My title, my honor, my love. And I will not rest until I've taken everything from him.
Elric, I don't care about your armies or your wars. I care about her. Burn this world down, but leave her.
Ultimately, I'm prouder of the new one. I mean, I think the new one took it to another level, and that was our goal. But I'll always hold a place for that original one in my heart, you know. And it wasn't until after the 45-minute version that I wrote the sequels. Me and Ryan wrote the sequels, and at least the outlines to them. And as I was writing the sequels, I realized that's when the backstory got way bigger and way deeper. I had 75 pages of backstory written, spanning from the dawn of humanity. I mean, like from the vampires evolving from Homo sapiens, so 200,000 years ago. But yeah, capturing that in an hour and 40-minute film was very, very challenging. And knowing we're not getting into every single detail, but we got to know those details, so they're subtle. And it's deciding out of this massive chunk of a story, what part of the story are we trying to tell. And so Ryan was the first one, and we really developed the next phase of the story, which was the getting deeper with the vampires, deeper with the backstory. And that was another year process of writing that before we even filmed the movie. It is a self-contained film, but the story is not complete. I mean, it does leave it open, and I think the first one, ultimately, the main themes are stories of love, and it is subtle in there, and it's again, going back to Shakespeare. I mean, you can draw inspiration of Romeo and Juliet, or it's the idea that why, because these people are of different classes or different structures or different race, that it's the people around them like go against it so bad, and then it's like massive tragedy happens. So they fear what they don't know. So like Elric's family in the story are very against the humans, and so when Elric falls in love with a human woman, they fear that. So it's the battle of fear and love. Elric's trying to love, but his family fears, and when you fear something, you know, that's when tragedy happens. That's when things happen for no reason. And so I guess it's a film that basically just makes you question that. There's no answers in it. That's, especially in the first one, there's no resolution. So it's, I think, a film that leaves you pretty stunned and asking more questions more than giving you any answer. Ryan and I wrote a lot of the vampire dialogue, and Ryan specifically wrote a lot of the dialogue, and, you know, I helped guide it and what needed to be said. He, you know, from his background, he's a very Shakespearean actor. You know, he was good at like structuring that dialogue very precisely, and that's what we needed. The vampires have been around for so long that everything they say means something. They're not throwing their words away. They think very carefully about what they say, and they're masters at that. They're masters of dialogue. So their brains move fast, but everything they say means something. They do not waste a word. David and Nathan were, you know, they got this really kind of raw modernism to them, and so I knew they were going to need to help with the human dialogue. So that's why there's 4 writers on this screenplay. And then my job was just to kind of guide it all and make sure everything was fitting and in place. It was a really complicated story to write, and then still writing it through production. You know what I mean? It was just a big story made on a low budget. So it was like the story kept evolving and evolving and evolving, and I think that's what good stories should do. I mean, you evolve them. Bill Otto and I met on the first professional feature film I ever did, which is directed by Martin Rogers, about 5.5 years ago now, summer of '08. I was asking him all these cinematography questions because I was very into cinematography. I mean, I loved it, and we just had a really good click. After that, I didn't talk to him for 2 years, and I emailed him one day when I was trying to decide what I was going to do with the vampire film that I had made with no money. You know, I called him up and thought, all right, would you be interested in shooting this? And I sent him the original film, and he said he was. So his daughter was born right before the film. And then I was like, but I really want Bill to do it. And so we brought him and his wife and his newborn baby all the way up in the freezing cold. This guy's from LA, you know, -15 below. We housed them up. And then all of a sudden, Otto and I just had this click. We just really understood each other's vision. Like, he really knew what I was going for, and as an actor in the film that I'm directing, you know, it's weird because it's kind of like I have a whole different mentality when I'm not in the scene I'm directing. I'm really behind the frame. I'm really composing everything out. But I have to let that go when I'm in front of the camera. When I'm in front of camera, it's like, cut, boom, how is that shot? And I'll know immediately from his reaction if we need to do it again or not. And sometimes he'll try to be like, oh, this is good, and I'll be like, no, we gotta do it again. So I don't see the shots that I'm in until the editing room, which is a really, that is putting a huge trust in my DP. But I know he's gonna do it. In my personal opinion, in the way I create these films, I feel it all starts with the actors, and everything else builds around that. The visuals and compositions are awesome, but if your actors aren't in it, that stuff's not gonna matter to me. I never went to school to learn how to direct. I think it's just being a people person. The communication with every actor is very, very different. Not only do you gotta know their experience, their ability, but who they are as people. And it's a very psychological, emotional connection, so I try to really, every single actor I work with, know who they are as people and get them motivated, knowing what's gonna motivate them. Some actors you can be a little harder on, a little bit more like, all right, we gotta do this, and get them more driven that way. Some you gotta be really sensitive with and very calm. And I think that's just a big part about directing actors, is knowing and who each person is, you know? Yeah, you just see something in somebody. You just see like, I'm looking for people more than actors, you know? And that's why I was saying, like, a lot of the cast in this, a lot of the times was their first time doing it. And as far as casting, yeah, I mean, all of a sudden it's like, I know this person, and like, he just fits it visually. He looks like the part, and his personality is like the part. And then you can go with like actors like Nathan Mills in the movie, who's a chameleon. He's not like his character at all, but I know he's such a good actor that he's gonna bring something to that character. Dave was actually one of the more experienced with the guys, at least working with me, because he's been making movies with me since we were 17, 18, but he's just never had training, so he's very raw. Everything that comes from him is very natural, and with an actor like that, you just wanna keep them that way, so you don't wanna get them in their head, as opposed to working with a Nick Milo Dragovich, he's a technical dude, and that's okay. You just gotta know how to, so you want him using that technique to get him to the raw. The feature film, you know, I didn't have an Isabel, there's no one around. Polly Rojas was totally what Isabel was supposed to be, like, and Polly was awesome. She spoke fluent French, came up, and she was someone that just vibed right with everything, and she nailed it, you know? So yeah, I mean, I guess it's all about, you can't think too much about it, I guess. You just kind of like, there's a vision in your head, and you just kind of like throw it out there, and all of a sudden, bam, there's just someone that comes into play. And it's happened with every film I've ever made. There's always someone out there that's gonna nail the role and nail the character, and it's just about putting the energy out there, and you find them. So.
Tell me about how you came.
Okay, David Lee Smith was awesome, and he was so awesome to work with. Just so professional and so good. And he was the star of an independent film that's one of my favorite movies of all time, called The Man from Earth, which had a big impact on my life right when I was writing Crimson Winter. Oh man, I saw it for the first time a couple years ago I was playing college football, actually. I watched that movie.
But the only thing is nobody can talk.
And I had to go to practice in like 10 minutes. And on that, I was just like, oh my God, that movie blew my mind. It was just, that's another one of those things where it's just like, I saw him in this film, and he was so talented and so incredible, and it was like, and he had this look, and it was just like, dude, he's Aldrich. Like, he's the king of vampires. He's Elric's father. I can't even remember. I might have been talking to Dave or something about it, but I think it said something like, God, it'd be awesome if the Man from Earth played Aldrich. You know, we found a way to contact his manager and called him up, and I think it's getting over the fear of them saying no. You got to just be like, well, if they say no, they say no. And we threw it out there, sent them the script, and David Lee Smith was on board, man. Hey, how you doing, man?
Good to see you. You can do that.
I never talked to David Lee Smith until he arrived on set. I had 15 minutes to talk to him, and Crimson Winter is like an insane, epic backstory. And I had to explain to him in 15 minutes everything going on, what his character was about. So he had to learn all these lines in Latin, and he had like 3 days to do it.
Nostra es caetate est emoticum.
And he just got it. I mean, it was crazy. The guy just understood everything going on. I mean, a very, very deep role, and he nailed it. I met Keith when I was 6 years old. I've known Keith since I was 6, and we were buddies growing up. We became really close friends though through film. That's what's interesting. In high school, freshman year, we realized we were both really into movies, and me and my buddy Dave, and who's also in the film, and Keith and Thomas, who's also in the film. Thomas is always a soldier and extra in the background. You know, we were super into Lord of the Rings, and
Here's the thing, we were first in line for Lord of the Rings for 3 years.
so we were back then even talking about movies and into film, and I think that that shared creativity brought us all together.
Oh, here we go. Boromir's.
The first completed film we made, we were 17, and I remember Keith being very, even back then, just an unbelievable actor, man. Like, he played like 5 different roles in that first film, and each one he morphed into the different character, and he just had it. He had a naturalism. He's one of those actors that elevates it, you know, and not every actor does that. Like, there's some actors that come in and play their parts, and they're good, but he was one of those actors that we need Keith in this film. He's going to elevate it. And that's how he was. He was a character, man.
Fucker.
No. Do it.
What?
You know.
What?
While we were filming, on days he wasn't acting, he was helping all the grips and moving stuff, hauling stuff, just working his ass off, you know, and then he'd come in on days he was an actor and just like nail it. And so I was just really proud of him, and you know, it's one of those things, and I'm really, everyone around him was blessed to have him around and have him on the film, you know.
He's fine.
We're leaving! Come with us now!
Get out of here. Go.
Now!
Go. Okay. The fuck up. Now.
He died 9 days before filming the second time around, and it was, you know, it was one of those things, like that second time around, it was like we were filming this for Keith, and that was it. It was like, we're gonna finish this film for Keith. And you know, I love Keith. He was a brother to me, and I wanted to use him in every film I ever made for the rest of my life, you know. And this movie's dedicated to him, and you know, I loved him, and I think it's an honor to have him in the film. And
Say hi.
What's up, camera? How you doing?
I think sometimes people watching the film won't even realize it, but through the February shoot, it was 3 straight weeks of grueling temperatures. Like at night, shooting in -20, -15, below zero weather. I mean, going long hours, hiking up crazy mountains through 2 feet of snow. Like, I mean, it's very challenging, and just to see the team around me, like, busting their fucking ass, you know, like every single one. Isaac Marble, Brandon Day as kind of the producers behind the scenes, organizing these huge things to plow through snow, to get a base camp literally built in the middle of the wilderness. That was incredible. Our grips, you know, Jason Rogers, Will Long, Andrew Thee, like, their stamina through that. I mean, and I think that's where it comes to like an equal motivation. Like, if I'm gonna see these guys plowing through this, you know, I'm gonna plow through this, and I want them to see me plowing through this. Ah! The cold is making me lose my
What are you gonna do before the lakes?
Yell to the gods and wage war so they dump snow on me.
It's snowing. You
I
realize
know.
this, right?
It's about to snow again.
Very nice.
Or what if it's like quarter-inch sized balls of hail?
Even better.
Well, well. Look at this with ya.
But you gotta be willing to do it. I mean, you want it that way in a way, because it just drives you.
Right? Making this moving picture show. And scheduled to go up some pretty cool caves, film some pretty cool stuff. Spent like $2,000 on a Steadicam guy. Spent another $700 on his plane ticket and another $700 on shipping his equipment up. Gonna do something pretty cool.
You fucking better.
And
Except
we're on the cave now. Next morning to go.
We can't go to the caves because they're flooded.
No way.
All right, about to go into a pretty scary looking cave, but really it's our last option for the Steadicam shot, and the Steadicam shot is just too badass to pass up on, so I'm going in. Ceiling height, right now I can stand straight up, but just barely. Width, well, it's pretty close to being able to fit 2 people. Hopefully it gets wider though.
It looks so awesome, man. And that's how it rolls. Like, you know it's gonna look sweet, and it's gonna look sweeter than if we built a set that looks like a mine shaft. Like, we're in that environment. Well, that's the other crazy thing about low budget, and when you're casting films like this too, you gotta realize, you know, there's no working with diva actors. You know, I mean, like, these guys, we gotta do our own stunts. I cast soldiers from the college I played football at, so I cast ex-football players and people that were still playing football, because I knew I'm gonna need tough people. I'm gonna need people that can take a hit, can fall down a mountain. I would do things differently now. I mean, at the time though, it was our only option. We had to fight with real weapons. That shot of me running through 4 different people on the dolly shot, I mean, I'm fighting with a battle-ready real sword that could fucking kill somebody. And it's like, it's not sharp, you know, we dull it down, but still. And so for me, I've got to be so fluid, know exactly where I'm moving that thing, but then I've got to make sure the 4 guys I'm going with know exactly where they're moving. And then the camera's got to be moving exactly with us. And this is all with a real weapon. And you just had to have everyone willing to do it and believe in the person across from them. And we did it. To be honest, I think I got the most injured, which is probably, I don't know what you want to say, the gods are being like, all right, this guy's asking everyone to do this. We're going to fuck him up a lot. I got probably the most injured on set. I was falling out of frame in the scene, and so we built this jail cell with Shire built the jail cell in Brandon Day, I think, with PVC pipe, and there was just one that happened to be fell out and was sticking out, and I didn't see it. And so in the shot, I'm supposed to fall out of frame, and I just like threw myself out of frame and landed right on it, and it messed up my whole eye. Great makeup artist fixed it for the rest of the shoot because I had a swollen eye for the whole past shots. And then that same day, torch dripped on my hand, which scarred me.
I haven't torch wound after I hit my eye.
Okay, so let's see. We got that. We got the eye.
That same shoot, May, I felt was like harder. Like I got more injured and messed up in the May shoot than anything. I was thrown off a horse during a ridge, epic chopper ridge scene, almost cracked my knee. I mean, my knee was swelled out to here. Couldn't walk for like 2 weeks. First time I ever learned how to horse ride, I was like 20, 21, and I went out to the ranch. There's this beautiful black mare named Charlotte, and I was like, someday I'll ride that horse. And I wasn't ready to ride that horse yet.
Was it her first or second ride? I don't remember, but because she's my sister's, and she reached back to sniff Maria, and Maria was like, oh, she's being curious, you know, she was just like 2.5 or 3. She reaches back, she grabs Maria's chaps, and throws her to the ground.
They would always make jokes like, oh, well, you gotta, you know, that horse is a ballsy horse, and you gotta have some balls to do it. And I was like, oh, you know, I'm gonna do it, I can do it. And so I rode at the ranch for a few years, and then it so happened, I was like, went up to Anna and the Worths at the ranch. I was like, Anna, I want to ride Charlotte. And that was my first time riding that horse was in the film. And it was just a really special experience because I had bonded with that horse a little bit before filming and through those years, and it was just a really euphoric experience to like riding this horse that I have this connection with, and a challenging horse to ride on an English saddle, which I'd never ridden an English saddle before, with a chopper 30 feet from me. It was just a really beautiful experience, and that horse was she's a wild one, you know, but she's good too. Like if you have control and you're connected with her, she's awesome.
She is smart and she is athletic and she's pretty and knows it, you know. So you compare that to a high school girl with the same attitude, who learned she could use men at a very young age and things like that. And it's easier to understand her. Yeah.
And it was kind of funny because the 3 times I got thrown off her that day, she would just run off. The first 2, she'd run off because I'd get back up, and I was all like pissed that I got thrown off. And it was kind of like she was testing me too, like, come on, why aren't you staying on? And the last one was supposed to be the last chopper shot across this big ridge, and I was just going, and I lost control and fell and hit my knee, didn't stand up for like 5 minutes. The horse turned back around and came back to me and waited for me. It was like she knew that one I was hurt. The other 2, she knew I was fine. She just like, she was testing me and just like, oh, okay, come on, let's go. But it was like that one she knew, and she came back and waited for me. And then she was a champ, and we did one more and nailed it. And it's just really cool. I mean, it's the whole idea of humans connecting with horses, and it's about just being in the zone with them. I was in New York City, and I'll never forget, I walked out of just finished, we were right at the end of finishing sound editing in May of 2012, I believe. And I was walking out, I was in a great mood. I was like, man, you know, and I was thinking to myself at that point, like, God, if I could do this every single day of my life, this is what I would want to do. And I was just walking down the street in Manhattan, New York City, and all these people are huddled behind this white van, and they were like, our cat's under there, our cat's under there, and I looked under the car, and there's this cat like freaked out, and there's like crazy traffic going by, and they couldn't get it because the cat was freaking out. And I remember being like, man, there's no way they're gonna get this cat. Same way I approach filmmaking. It's one of those things where it's just like, okay, man, like someone's got to step in and do something here. And I tried to get the cat, tried to help them get it, and it was crazy. It was clawing and biting, and I was like, oh man, you know. So I stood out there, and it's almost like that letting go again, tapping into something. And I was like, how are we gonna get this cat? And at that moment, the cat walked out from under the van right next to me. And I knew I had to go. I had to go right then. If I didn't right then, who knows what would happen. So I just, boom, grabbed the cat, and that thing slashed all my arms, bit me right in the vein, and there's blood everywhere. But I just held on to it. And then it calmed down, gave the cat back to its family, his family, hers, and then I ended up in the ER about 6 hours later because my hand had swelled up to the size of a baseball mitt and started coming up my arm. I was stuck in the hospital for 5 days and had to finish the film in the hospital. You know, you're just on a journey and like you just roll with the punches, and like you can't try to conquer the universe. You have to become one with the universe. And if you learn how to become one with the universe, with everyone that you're dealing with and every circumstance you're dealing with, you just learn how to tap into it, and you have a camera and you just try to create. I think I'd emailed, actually the first time I emailed Nox Arcana was February of 2010. And I had an idea to refilm some of the stuff back then with a budget, and I wanted to see if they would be down to let me use their music. And Joseph Vargo emailed me back, said, yeah, let me check out the film. I'll never forget reading a YouTube comment. Like I said, these little things that stay in your head, and like there's these one guys who were like, man, Nox Arcana's so awesome. I wish we could use their music for our movies, but it'll never happen, you know, because we're indie, low budge, and those are those challenges. It's like, well, why can't that happen? You know what I mean? I was like, all you can do is try. So I found the contact information. Nox Arcana sent it on their way, and I think even in that original letter, which I might have somewhere, it said like, we might plan on reshooting this movie with like $10,000. Would you be okay with us using your music? And I explained how much their music was a huge influence on the film. And music's always a big influence for me when I'm writing or coming up with visions or ideas. I'm listening to music a lot. And Mr. Vargo was like, yeah, send me a copy. I sent him the copy, and I remember the email, and I'll never forget, he's like, I liked what I saw for what you guys had to use. You have the permission to use our music. And I was like, awesome. And then when we went out to make the feature, that was when Bill Piotrowski emailed me and was interested in writing a whole new score for the film. And I remember that was big too, because that was the idea of letting go of the original stuff. I was so into the Nox Arcana music for it. And, you know, then Bill and I got on the phone, and it was awesome. And I was another guy I just connected with immediately, and he was into it. And I'm so glad everything worked out the way it did. I mean, then he wrote the music that evolved with how the film evolved, and everything just worked out the way it needed to, you know? That's what I like about filmmaking, is you have a certain idea, a certain vision, but then you cannot let you have to be able to let things go and let the film flow and grow on its own. It's like its own entity. It's a child. You have to let the film do its own thing. And as a director, that's something I'm very key about, is like, this film is beyond me. It's beyond everyone working on it. It needs to become its own evolutionary entity. And if you're tapped into it enough, you allow things to grow naturally. And Nox Arcana I was so attached to. And then Gladiator soundtrack, we try to draw some influence on. But then all of a sudden you realize, wait a minute, this film, even though it has elements from those two things, it is its own thing, and it needs its own sound. And I think it was Bill and I sitting there talking, watching the rough cut on the films with no music one day, and it was like, wait a minute, this film is dark, man. It's not, originally it was this epic driving thing that we were going for, and it's like, this film is dark. And Bill showed me Requiem for Father Colby, which was just so unbelievable. And it was the inspiration and what eventually drove the entire sound, the entire film. And I pushed Bill very hard, and we had to capture Ligeti sounding things and this dark, still melodic, but more subtle type music. And same thing, I mean, I was up in his apartment, we were writing things at the very last second, and I'm trying to capture that Mysteries of the Night, which was my favorite Nox Arcana song. And that was trying to capture a feel of that song, but still make it its own and still make it just as powerful. And I think Bill went through the same things I went through. Recreating the film is capturing lightning in a bottle, and how do you match it? But I think eventually we were successful at that, and I wouldn't change the soundtrack to this day. It's one of my favorite parts of the entire movie. Post-production was nuts. I mean, we had, and in retrospect, these are things you learn. I'd have all our post-production crew in one area. I had post-production all across the United States. You know, I was living in LA at the time. I had crew still back in Montana. I flew to New York to hang out with Ulysses, who was awesome. I mean, he really came up with how to tell the story the best way. Took all this footage we had, ordered it perfectly. Picture locked the film with him in New York. Flew back to LA, then flew to Cleveland to finish the music with Bill Piotrowski. Then back up to New York to do sound editing. I was doing ADR. I was directing Nathan Mills on ADR from a hospital bed, who he was recording his own ADR in Portland, Oregon. Even into the post-production, that was a nightmare, you know, having everyone all over the place with trying to get through quality control, trying to get our drives shipped from New York back to LA, back to New York, back to LA, back to New York. Can't say how many times, 5 or 6, you know. So it was insane, you know, but we got through it, and it was an adventure, and it was awesome. The reason I love film so much is it's such a collaborative art form that brings all art forms together. It brings acting, music, photography, costuming. I mean, it brings every single art form together, makeup, and you try to create a story, which is like one of the original art forms, is you're just trying to tell a story in the end. The reason the film company is called Interwoven is it's about connection. You know, how do we connect as people? How do we connect with the universe? How do we connect with God? You know, how do we connect with the world? And my big goal is just encouraging creativity. It's always like, this is just a platform, and anyone that wants to be involved in it, I would love them to be involved. I mean, I used to think I created these films because it was something awesome to do, and I had something inside of me that wanted to create these things. But then it evolved into, well, I want these films to speak to an audience in some way, and that's still a big part of it. But ultimately, through it all, I've realized there's 3 big reasons I do these films, and the first reason is for the people working on the movies with me, because I've had many, many stories of people that have come up on these films that they've completely changed their lives and impacted them, and it has fulfilled them. And that's why I do it. For the people working around me, is like, I hope you're getting something out of this, and I hope you're feeling fulfilled out of this. But it's not a forced thing. You know, you just present something, and it's up to them. And the people that become fulfilled out of it really change and grow. And that's the first reason. The second reason is for the audience. You hope the audience gets something out of it. And if I can inspire one person in the theater, then we did our job. And the third is from myself. You know, I think my fulfillment comes from the first 2, being fulfilled. And I think the future is just to keep building and keep bringing these powerful stories to life that make people think.
Rolling?
Yeah.
Vampire has been a beautiful, wonderful experience. It's been a journey. See you for Vampire 2. Peace.